Welcome to the ISRK Podcast. I'm your host, Kumar Vikrant. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Hanyang University, Seoul, Korea. ISRK, that is Indian Students and Researchers in Korea, is a voluntary support group that works towards the benefit of the Indian diaspora in Korea. On today's episode, I have the pleasure to be in conversation with Dr. David Tizzard. I hope I got the pronunciation right for the family name. Yeah, okay. So Dr. Tizzard is a assistant professor at Seoul Women's University in Korea. And he also writes a weekly column for the Korea Times newspaper, which is the oldest English daily in South Korea. And also, Dr. David launched his podcast recently, Korea Deconstructed, which I'm loving, by the way. I've listened to all the episodes. So it's a pleasure to have Dr. David on the podcast. Dr. David, thank you very much for your time and joining us today.
And thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here as well. You make me blush with all that. No, but thank you, Kumar. And the appreciation is reciprocated.
Yes. And I'm a bit of a fanboy, by the way, of your articles, because I'm very much interested in every week I look forward to your articles. So that is something very interesting. So thank you very much for writing, actually.
It's hard to write an article every week,
right?
Because you're always trying to write not what other people are writing about. You know, it's not about just being sort of outlandish or outrageous for clicks and attention, but it constantly keeps me thinking. And I've been really surprised by the amount of feedback I get from the articles. It's incredible to consider. But just if we start there, like, not just about my articles, but about articles and writing in Korea more generally.
Right.
What do you think about that? Like the articles out there, whether it's my articles, the English language articles, do you have any observations on them, Kumar?
So far, if I talk about the Korea Times, so they generally seem to be neutral, largely. Well, or they try to be. If I talk about a political biasness or a specific perspective, I think that they try to be neutral. And in other aspects, if I can be open, I see very anti-Japanese stance being taken on several issues. I think, well, sometimes it gets too anti-Japanese. And of course, China, well, everywhere there is anti-Chinese thing going on. I don't know till what extent that is correct or incorrect, but and for general aspects, I see like what you also talked about in your podcast, like sensitive topics like suicide being masked as extreme measures, people not willing to talk about it openly. And so those kind of things are going on. So what are your thoughts on it?
The president of the Korea Times worked in the Nomuhyun administration. So that will give you some idea of the political, of course, the president doesn't choose all the topics and the articles, but I will say that the Korea Times, despite differences, they've always given me freedom. They've never said to me, you can't write that or that's dangerous. There was one time they said to me, if you write about a specific individual, it would be defamation. You know about that in the Korean press. Even if you write the truth.
That's right.
If you say something bad about someone, even if it's the truth, you can be sued for defamation. That's the only one time in my career that they've told me, please don't write that. That's dangerous. But what I would also suggest is there's a difference between the English language media and the Korean language media.
Right.
There's a lot that doesn't come across. And so I try to, as much as possible, write with a knowledge of the Korean media, with a knowledge of the Korean television, radio, and print, and use that rather than just the English, because there's a huge difference between them, Kumar.
I suppose that it must be getting lost in translation as well. And also the cultural differences between the English, it's completely different words. So merging them together, I suppose that's a topic of, higher education and cultural understanding and everything associated with that.
YTN and Yonhap News on the television this week, they've been already criticizing Wegukins for Halloween and Corona. It's not even Halloween yet, but the headlines are talking about Wegukins, Halloween, Hongdae, Itaewon, but they're already constructing that narrative that if there's a jump over Halloween, it will be because of foreigners. And
so they're preparing beforehand.
Yeah, and that doesn't come across sometimes. And if, you know, it doesn't always come across. So that's sometimes why I think it's important to be conscious, at least, of the Korean language media.
Sure, yeah. Anyway, so you are doing a great job of bridging that gap. So I really appreciate your endeavor. Yeah, I am actually very much intrigued by your journey. Like, you have been living in Korea for 2 decades now, and I know that you finished your bachelor's in the UK, and then you came to Korea for your master's, eventual PhD, and now you're living here. So how did that come about, and what attracted you towards Asia and in Korea in particular?
I'm always conscious of how honest I should be, because there are some people that are academics like yourself, Kumar, and there are some people like me that just kind of fall into this thing. So I'll try to be as honest as possible.
Sure,
while also maintaining a little bit of decorum. In the United Kingdom, in the south of England, I did a undergrad in English literature and theatre, which was fantastic. I actually started off doing business administration because I thought I was going to be rich, but it sucked, man. I didn't like it. You know, I wanted literature and philosophy and art. I was a young guy. I wanted to read and create and do things. So I had a great time at university, really explored so many things in those different fields. And then I graduated and I just spent a year working in a music venue, seeing all these great artists come through, whether it was the Pixies, whether it was Amy Mann, whether it was Slipknot. Every night was a different thing. And I just got so into that. And then I realized I could stay here just working in a music venue, or I could try to go out and see the world. So I decided to go the other side of the world and see what might happen. So that's the story.
That's kind of it.
There's no big reason. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So like you said, there wasn't any specific region, but how did you land in Korea and, for example, not in Japan or not in Singapore or Thailand?
I'd done a lot of traveling when I was young, so I was very fortunate to come from a quite affluent family. And we lived abroad my whole life. We'd been going on holidays like Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong. I'd been to all of those places as a very lucky young child. So I hadn't been to Korea. And I realized that if I went to Thailand, I would probably just do loads of drugs and sit on the beach. And that's not the only thing that you do in Thailand. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm trying to speak of my personality and what would happen.
Of course.
And I knew about Japan and I'd been there. And so I thought Korea was just this kind of, it seemed
enigma,
the right thing.
Mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd watched the Korea-Japan World Cup at university, 2002. I'd already seen Old Boy. I'd had a couple of Korean, I wouldn't call them real friends, but more acquaintances at university, right? So I had those interactions. And so it was perhaps subconscious, it was perhaps fate, it was perhaps just the only place that would take me, you know, but I'm so thankful
I understand that
I found my way here, but that's the honesty. I wish there was a great story for it, but that's the honest truth. And I'm so thankful to the people of Korea for having me in a way, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So even though you say that there is no specific story, that is a story in itself, and it's the story of life, I suppose. Things happen and you fall into it. So yeah. Right. And so how multicultural is Dover, by the way? You were born in Dover, right? And
I was born in Dover, and then I spent a lot of time on the southeast coast. I also lived in Melbourne, Australia for 3 years. Now, not really multicultural. I was lucky enough to go to some, in England, we call them public schools. Elsewhere, you might call them private schools. But I was lucky enough to go to some of those schools. And we always, I remember in Australia, my best friend was Ziad Gassip. He was from Egypt. A couple of friends in Dover Grammar School for boys as well. One was from Singapore, one was from India. It's not hugely multicultural, but when I grew up in those environments, our teachers and our professors and our masters, they very much instilled into us an idea that doesn't matter where you're from, Doesn't matter the color of your skin, doesn't matter your religion, whether you're attractive or not, you treat everybody the same.
Right.
That attitude of color blindness is actually changing these days.
Yes.
It's very weird to see that change.
That's right. Although the progressives say that they want equality, they have compassion, everything. Equality, they say equity. But anyway, they say that they're very compassionate and everything, but they are the ones who propagate the group identity and identity politics. So I see a contrast there.
Yeah. And so just from my experience, although my upbringing wasn't that multicultural, I wasn't from sort of inner London or something like that, but it was never a thing, because whether somebody was from another place, they were just a person. And that was really instilled in us, and any elements of difference or racism were kind of cracked down on by the teachers. And I thought, although I was in the majority, so I can't speak for the Egyptians or the Indians and things like that, they might have perceived it differently. And I'm sure at those schools there is a lot of bullying. But there was an idea of mutual respect that we had to have for each other. And I think it served me really well. And well, let's just take this idea. So I grew up being told that color blindness was the way. Right. So, and now you're talking about this color consciousness where we have to focus on differences. I've tried to understand this, not necessarily to say this change is good, this change is bad, but I've tried to observe that this change has happened. You know, it's happened. And so therefore, how do we explain it, or how do we come to terms with it? And now, just very briefly, if I can, the way I've come to terms with this idea vis-a-vis multiculturalism and changing attitudes is that previously, one of the initial ideas was that identity was based on a set profession or something like that. So you had to be a priest, you had to be a lawyer, certain people. And that was the original idea, whether you go back to Plato's Philosopher Kings or Confucius, right? The priestly class of the Middle Ages. But then that identity changed to this kind of universalism. And it changed to colorblind and everybody's equal and we're all the same. And then from that idea produces a reaction to that. And the reaction to everybody is the same. And let's be colorblind. Where do you go from that? You go to the opposite. And the opposite was, and I'm coming at it a little bit Hegelian, right? The transformation of ideas. And then it was, well, no, let's actually be different and let's acknowledge our differences. So the reason it's so passionate about identity at the moment is because identity was previously kind of pushed down. In our generation. And so it's not necessarily, we might think it's good or bad personally and have all these things, but it's about, I think, understanding the change. And then there'll be something that comes next, Kumar. There's a question for you. What comes next?
Well, we
can't go back, can we? Going back is not necessarily the way. Something will come next. What will that be?
Yeah, I also wonder that. I don't know.
Write a paper about it. You can add to your citations.
I'm naive in these aspects. That's why I'm talking with people like you to understand more. Well, so talking about all this, what is your take on what do humanities and social sciences add to the modern world? I'm asking this because we talked about culture and everything. So I come from a culture back home from India where most people are actually involved in science, tech, medicine, and fields like that, which are super practical, super important. Like the whole world basically runs on engineering. I myself included am in engineering, doing research in engineering. But I see all the people I talk to, all the students, most of them are in science, tech, engineering, and all that. And very few actually select humanities and social sciences. I wonder how much you know about that kind of culture, but what is the reason behind that? And what is your recommendation to students from Indian background or any other background who think like that only science and tech are the most practical stuff? And would you recommend them to pick up philosophy, social sciences, humanities, etc., Korean studies, for example?
It's a really good question. And growing up, most of my doctors in Dover were Indian.
Right.
Always had cold hands, Kumar. I'm not sure why. I think it was because they were doctors, but you know, but that knowledge of without trying to generalize or stereotype, but there's always a huge respect and focus on education. And certainly coming in England, I saw so many professional and qualified Indian people as doctors, right? As scientists. And it made me sort of think, well, that's a really admirable thing. That, you know, a culture produces that, and it focuses so much on education, and it pushes people in there. So I don't think it's possible to suddenly change. Now, in terms of what we do as academics, I would say you're a genuine academic. I just write some stuff. I don't really contribute to the development. Well, I'm being very serious about this. I don't really contribute to the development of the world in a material manner, in terms of engineering, in terms of technology, in terms of these Zoom calls, these microphones, my watch on my hand. You do that. You make the world a different place. And that should be acknowledged. It's kind of easy, I've noticed. I'm a little bit disheartened sometimes with academia where I am, because you can sometimes just write a little bit of nonsense and use all these funny sounding words and get published. And I've had to battle that myself, and I haven't always won. You know, you can talk about sort of postmodernism and hegemony and like all these and use all these words, and people think it's really profound. And underneath it all, I've read back some of my work when I was going through a postmodern phase and thought, am I actually saying anything here? You know,
is it you speaking, or is it the ideology speaking, or is it the academia driving the writing?
Well, no, I think it was definitely me speaking, but I think I was looking at, you know, what could be done. And I, you know, during my life, I got really into Hinduism for a while. I got really into Taoism for a while. I got really into Marxism for a while. I like to engage in ideas and live them through. And I lived that postmodern thing. And that's why the podcast is called Career Deconstructed and everything, right? But I realized at the end of it that, am I actually saying anything? But I had to go through that process and come out the other side to realize communication needs to be simple. You need to have an idea and you need to express it in a way that your grandmother could understand it. Not just elites in academia and things like that. So there is a danger in the humanities, and I do see it that it can make you, in that you only talk in jargon. You only talk in these words that doesn't actually mean anything. And I've gone through that and come out the other side, and I'm against it. So you asked, what should Indian people do?
Or what, if you have any suggestions for them to go into social sciences or humanities, or pick up, or if you can elaborate on what kind of careers lie ahead of them once they complete such kind of degrees or stuff like that.
So yeah, I'll try to answer that. And I previously said that people like you, Kumar, you change the world. If you study, you're very proud. Yeah, sure. Yes, we do, David. That's very correct. But it's absolutely correct.
Excuse me.
No. It's good. It's good. You're not lying. And but here, if you do social sciences, if you do literature, if you do philosophy, what ends up happening is you don't change the world, you change yourself. And that's the goal. And there's the difference. And I'm not saying that engineers like you don't go through transformations as well, because absolutely everybody does. But by going through certain studies like this, it's going to bring profound changes in the way that you think and you approach ideas. Might not necessarily bring success, financial, career. It might not, I understand actually. But I found it to be so rewarding. And I don't really care what certificate I have, what title I have, but the journey that I've come through into understanding, understanding myself, understanding communication and ideas, I've found it, I believe it's made me a better person. And it's hard to become a better person in a social media driven age. We always want to be right. We always want to be profound, but it's taught me a great deal of humility. It's taught me to stand before ideas and realize how little I know and how many smart people out there. And I think it's really good sometimes to be the dumbest person in the room. You get to learn a lot. And also people don't learn how to take criticism or how to take new ideas
they most of times they have preconceived notions which they do not want to change, and until unless people delve into conversations, then only I think everyone can progress. And also society is composed of individuals, so as you said, once an individual develops, I think society at large eventually develops. It's integration. So yeah,
I think the focus on the individual is so important. And so
right.
what people should do and what they should study, it's just all about yourself. And I don't mean that in a selfish way, because if you study yourself, you can help other people, you can help your family, your friends, and people around you. So it's about doing what's right for you. I just want to say this one last thing on this topic before we miss the opportunity, which is that I sometimes see some professors in the Korean studies field and history field, and they say the job market is terrible. I wouldn't advise anybody to get into it and things like this. However, that sometimes feels to me like getting to the top and then kicking away the ladder. Like I did it, but now it's so terrible now, I don't encourage any of you below me to do it. And I find that a little bit abhorrent, and I have the complete opposite idea. I'm not an amazingly intelligent guy. I'm not born with all of these things, but I got there somehow in some way. And so I don't want to discourage anybody else from doing that. And moreover, I want to encourage them to go not up to where I am, but to go beyond me and help me. Yeah. Somebody said to me, like, David, you sometimes help these people like masters and undergrads and do these things. And like, what if they become more famous than you? And I said, well, that's the point.
Well, yeah.
It's genuinely the point. It's not a competition to me. And I do feel that we need to be allowing other people to come up, and not only to come up, but to rise above us and to stand and go further beyond and remove that idea of competition, but just promote that. And that sometimes gets lost. So I just wanted to say that.
And that is actually a beautiful thing when you see other people doing good in their life, because you know that they must have overcome lots of obstacles and they must have developed themselves quite a lot to come to that point. So it's actually a beautiful thing. I also am in complete favor with you, because this thinking of competition and not helping others, and it's just terrible. And I think it's very primitive. So yeah.
But it's inside. I agree with you, Kumar. It's inside all of us. There is that element of competition and jealousy, and we feel that sometimes, and social media might exacerbate it, but we can overcome it, and there is that goodness that we can do. So yeah, to find joy in other people's success is a good thing. Yeah. And it's also not what you achieve. It's not what you achieve. It's what you overcome to get there, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's meaning in that in our lives. So. And talking about that, actually, being in academia, I see that one of the greatest joys of life is actually mentorship, mentoring other people, other students, like your juniors, bringing them up in life. I often hear good professors saying that it's one of their greatest pleasures in life to actually mentor others. So yeah, so there you have it.
I'm just to go on that, I would say that in my experience in career and academia, I struggled to find those people sometimes, not just because of the environment and things like that.
I would say most of the time, actually, I would say.
Yeah. Other people did. Other people were perhaps luckier than me, and it depends. And there's all these things. But for those people listening that might think about going into graduate school, there is this situation sometimes where all of a sudden you're on your own.
Sure.
And no professor is telling you what to do, and you don't have homework and you don't have an assignment. It's just like you
have to find the way. Yeah.
You have to find the way. And at one moment it's the scariest thing, and you get imposter syndrome. And it happens to so many people. I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, it's
real though, isn't it? You know that. Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
And you'll feel like an imposter. You shouldn't be here. There's no guidance. There's nothing. You don't know what to do. But at the same time, it's the most empowering thing, because you rise to the challenge and you grow, and you see that obstacle as a chance to grow. And that's what produces the people that get over it, because you grow through all those obstacles that you jump. So and mentorship, like I do office hours, and I have so many students come and see me, and we talk about different things, and I said I can't change the world like you. I get emails from students when they get like onto master's courses in the United States or things like that, and they'll reach out and they'll say, David, you did those recommendation letters to me, you helped me, I just wanted to say thank you. And it's genuinely having an effect on people's lives, and that's a really cool thing. It's not like working in an office, right? You're actually impacting people's lives in a meaningful, positive way, and it makes me it doesn't actually feel like work. Here's the
sure. The word is contentment. You feel content doing that, and there's pleasure in that, and people often derive meaning from those kinds of things. So because actually you are seeing your impact on individual lives, that's so beautiful.
It doesn't always pay the bills, but
sure.
Well, no, that's true. It doesn't always pay the bills, but it pays your heart and it pays your mind. And then if you have a peaceful mind, you go through life with a smile. And probably I will say at this point, right? So I work at 2 different universities, Hanyang and Seoul Women's.
Right.
I have 3 different radio spots. I have the podcast, I have bands, I have the column. I never at one point at the moment feel like I'm working.
Right. Yeah. I
Life
completely
feels,
understand.
I'm playing every day. I'm playing. So there's a difference between a career and a job. So just for anybody listening, a job is when somebody pays you to do something that you don't want to do.
Right. It's a job.
And if they didn't, that's why it's a job. And if they didn't pay you, you wouldn't do it because
it's a job.
Right? So if you pay me, I'll do it. That's a job, right? That's a job. And many people think that they're going to have a career, and it's very hard to have a career. Actually, there's a difference between a career and a job. I'm lucky enough in that I found a career in that everything I do, I would do for free. Actually,
sure, yeah.
It doesn't feel like a job, right? And so, if you can make your vocation your vacation, right? If you can do what drives you, if you can do what motivates you, what keeps you up at night. Then you're winning at life. And it doesn't matter if you're in STEM, doesn't matter if you're in the humanities, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. If you're doing what you love, you're winning at life.
I understand that completely because it's the same for me. So, yeah. And
is there not more pressure, Kumar? Like you said, it's the same for you. We spoke a little bit about that sort of Indian focus on education and drive. And how does that work for you? Is there like a big pressure, responsibility from parents or?
No, actually, I would say that I was lucky enough not to have that kind of pressure on me from the side of the family because they are pretty well-to-do. So there was never a pressure on me to pursue a specific stuff or to earn money for the family or stuff like. I know people like that. Sure, it's there, but not in my case. So I was free to pursue what I like, and I got into STEM, and after not till high school or even during my undergrads, I was not that interested in STEM initially. I was good at mathematics and science, so I was just doing it for the sake of it. But during my undergrad, actually, I fell in love with research, not exactly science and engineering, but the art of finding something new in science. So that I fell in love with during my undergrads. And I must say that I was lucky enough to be in contact with professors in India who were like driving that my endeavor for the search for the research, development, and meaning in my life. So they were gracious enough to actually guide me in that direction. So I fell in love with research, and then I pursued it, and I found so much meaning that now, like you said, I would do it for free. But of course, we need to pay our bills and live the life. So there you have that. But like you said, there's so much meaning when you pursue something that is important to you. So it's not a job anymore. It's your thing. So
it's really great to hear your experience, and I guess we should both be thankful for 2 things. One, for the opportunities and freedom that were given to us, which is really important because not everybody has that. And I guess 2, the fact that we found something. And this is also a really hard thing because now we live in a world where the message is be yourself. but there's no guidance of what to be. Like, you have to choose everything, but like, you have to choose your hair color, you have to choose your phone, you have to choose your gender and your
they
pronoun.
say
You have to choose everything.
Be yourself, but at the same time, society promotes or provides benefit to specific things. And like, for example, if we take beauty standards and things like that, in Korea, we see that for example, I would not like to generalize, but like, for example, I was recently talking to a woman. She is actually a fan of yours. She actually texted me on Kakao Talk, and she said that, oh, I follow your articles in the Korea Times after Dr. David's and others. And she is very much interested in reading all those stuff. So anyway, so she was saying that she has started walking and jogging for an hour every evening. So I asked her, is it for pleasure? Because many people actually like to sightsee and walk in nature and stuff like that. So I said, is it for pleasure or is it for exercising? So she said, oh, she hates it, or at least she does not like it that much, but it's for being in shape, and there's strict beauty standards in the Korean society. And I was like, oh, I'm aware of it. Of course, not from the perspective of women, but I'm sure it exists. So yeah, so at the same time, society promotes those kind of stuff, but at the same time says that be yourself. So what the person is supposed to be.
There's, to give you one example, and in life, we talk about oppression between genders, right? So that's a big topic that comes up in the media, sort of women's rights and oppression between genders. We also talk about oppression of sexual minorities. We also talk about oppression of ethnic minorities or immigrants. One thing that never really gets discussed is how important beauty is in society. The prejudice is, I don't really see much about it, actually. But society really judges and categorizes people according to their beauty and what they look like, and you can't really do much about
you can't get away with,
you're born with that
yeah.
face. I know that's why there's so much plastic surgery in South Korea, but you're born with that, and there is a great focus and discrimination that takes place consciously, subconsciously, systemically on attraction. Now, one story about Korean beauty standards. Last week, we were getting a passport, a British passport for my daughter, Elizabeth. She's 5 years old. So we went to the Korean photo shop and we said, we need a passport photo. We got the photo. She looked wonderful. We uploaded it onto Her Majesty's Passport Office, the British website, and it rejected it.
Why?
It said, you are not allowed to use computer editing or filters. And it said, this photo is edited, so we reject it. So we went back to the guy and we said, can we have another photo? But because you know that
it's so natural for them to edit it. Oh my God.
We went back and we asked for another one. Can you just do a natural one? So yeah,
sure.
That one also failed. So what we did is we got my daughter and we stuck her against the wall. We took a photo with a phone and she looked kind of like, and it didn't have pure skin and things like that. She's 5. We uploaded it, accepted straight away. So it's about systemic. Like there's infrastructure and logistics that some societies in Britain, you can't put a photo on a CV. Right? You're not meant to do that. It doesn't matter what you look like. So in Korea, you asked me, you're like, David, can I have your photo, please? It's natural.
It's natural.
The photos never look like real life, though. Korea, there's a huge focus. Yeah,
and talking about the Korean society, you have often talked about the exceptionally high suicide rate in Korea. And I have also talked about it in some of my articles and some of my talks. And I think it's one of the highest among the OECD countries, right? And so what do you think the reasons are for that? Is the society to blame, or what is going on?
I don't know. So I've spent a lot of time looking into it and researching it. It's the number one cause of death for young people. And that to me is one of the most heartbreaking things, because young people should not be saying life sucks, I don't want to live here. And doing that. And if they were dying from misadventure or drugs or extreme sports, then at least they're living and they're doing things. But here, the number one cause of death for young people is them saying this life is not worth it. And so that's systemic. that's systemic. That points to not a series of individual decisions, although they are individual decisions, how much control they have, but it points to a systemic thing. It points to a systemic problem, because that rate has been the highest in the OECD, or second or third for a long
Also,
long
I remember
time.
that it was higher for women as compared to men. Am I right?
No. So it's recently suicide amongst women in their 20s and 30s has jumped up. And so there has been an attention on that. I think economically they've been disproportionately affected by COVID, because certain industries, retail, entertainment, where a lot of young women have part-time jobs, they've been affected. Traditionally, men have committed more suicide in South Korea than women, although women attempt more suicide. So there's a difference. Women,
they have a high proclivity, but not necessarily taking the action.
Yeah, or they try but they don't succeed. So they have suicidal tendencies, or they might attempt suicide but not succeed for various reasons, but the men have a higher rate at it. Now, I think, first of all, it's important. What I tried to do, and I'm not sure if it's the correct way, but suicide in Korea is not like suicide in the West. Suicide in South Korea can often be seen as kind of like a protest thing, or it can often be seen as a glamorous thing. It can be seen as an honorable or a dutiful thing. So it's not always associated with depression, mental health, but it's sometimes
so it's a cultural thing in many aspects.
But it's a cultural thing. But for example, many Korean students might say to me at the bottom of a letter, I love you, or 사랑합니다. You don't do that in an English letter to your professor. It's weird. Like in the United Kingdom, love is a word that takes a long time to be said between couples. Like they'll go, I really like you. Yeah, I like you too. And you'll build up, and after a year, finally someone will say, I love you. It's a very powerful word. It's just a cultural thing. All right. The exact same word in South Korea, 사랑합니다, 사랑하다, is used far more frequently.
Commonly used.
It's commonly used. It's understood differently. So sometimes we literally translate suicide and tasal, right? Suicide. But we need to remember that the cultures understand those terms differently, and they use them differently. They manifest differently. In South Korea, the ex-president committed suicide, Roh Moo-hyun. The ex-mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, committed suicide. And most people looked at that and went, yeah, and then they give them a big celebration. So we shouldn't understand it. I think the first thing, we shouldn't understand it from our own cultures. We need to try to see it in a Korean context. And there is this context of protest suicide and an honorable death and sacrificing yourself to try to make problems go away for other people. There are mental health and depression issues in economics as well. But it's a little bit different than that, as I think.
And being on serious topics, I would also like to discuss the plummeting childbirth rates in Korea. I think it's the same for Japan and Singapore, and now also in some European countries, right? The childbirth rate is plummeting. And so I read several articles on this, and the foremost suggestion seems to be to increase immigration and rely on that to balance the population and stuff like that. So can you flesh that out a bit, this idea? And also, what is Korea's stance on immigration? Because several people coming to Korea also would like to know about how the immigration is in Korea and what is the government's stance on
it. There's so many questions there. First, I'll probably try to start with the idea of the fertility rate. So in South Korea, it's about 0.7. It needs to be 2.1 to maintain the population. 0.7, one of the lowest in the OECDs. In the 1960s and 70s, they had to tell South Koreans to stop having children. Like there used to be government announcements saying 2 is enough, right? If you have one boy, one girl, you're done. That's it. Stop having children. Fast forward 50 years, and now they're like, please have more. So these things change with time. But what I would suggest is we sometimes look at it as a problem. Now, should it really be seen as a problem?
Well, most times it's seen as a problem. So I want to understand that scenario, what's going on.
But let me ask you, Kumar,
Yeah.
if people decide, so I have, just to be clear, I have 2 children of my own,
Sure.
2 young
Yeah,
children.
yeah.
So I'm helping that 0.7. They have Korean citizenship as well.
Oh.
But if people decide through their own free choice that they don't want to have children, they want to pursue a career,
right?
Why is that a problem?
That's not a problem at all. And also, like in your, I think it was your first episode of your podcast about the adoptee children. And so I think in that podcast, your guest actually said that government has no business in what is going on in people's homes and what they choose to do with their life. If they want kids, fine. If they do not want kids, that's also fine. So, but the government actually is on the push to promote this childbirth and all that. So how do you see it?
Yeah, so you made a very good point there, Kumar. Dr. Lee Kyung-eun, she heavily criticized the idea that a government would offer financial benefits for those that have children, because it's kind of monetizing human life, and that shouldn't work like that. The government shouldn't say, if you have children, we'll give you $500 and a house.
Right.
We should not be thinking in those terms. Now, we have to come to terms with the idea that in South Korea, women were often removed from society. During the Joseon dynasty, you can watch period dramas like Mr. Sunshine, and you see all the beautiful women in hanboks. The reality was most of those women were kept in the angban, the inside rooms, and they were secluded from society. They often had to cover themselves from head to toe, not too different from Islamic outfits. Not saying that's good or bad, but all of a sudden, these women have come out into society in South Korea. And now many of them are deciding to choose a job, to choose a career. There's also financial problems going in with this, but it shouldn't necessarily be seen as a problem, right? So there are going to be things in terms of taxes and pensions, but I mean, South Korea is the 10th highest economy in the world, right? Yeah. If Samsung have got loads of money, right? Lee Jae-young, he didn't do his military service or anything like that. Like these chaebols, like, you want to help the country? You want to be the Republic of Korea or Samsung? Well, let's sort out some infrastructure. Some people are deciding not to have families, but to choose their own life, make their own decisions.
Like we see the housing crisis also going on right now. So in Korea.
That's going on. So I would say we could perhaps reframe it as not as a problem, but giving South Korean citizens more choice. Now, if you give them more choice, but you don't like their choices, tough, that's a democracy, right? If you don't want a democracy, then you can do the North Korean Chinese system, right?
Sure.
But we have to accept their choices if you want a democracy. And I think we should listen to those choices. We can think about more structural housing and economics and things like that, but we shouldn't be telling people have children or don't have children. I have children, changed my life. I think it's beautiful. If other people don't want it, absolutely fine. It's not a problem.
And also, I think it goes against the foundations of our civilization, the founding principles on which we are as a society based. Like it's like you cannot do an authoritarian stuff, like you said. Like if you do not like their choices, then implement authoritarian things like what happened in Soviet Russia or right now going on in China or North Korea. So yeah, that's right. I completely agree. And also I was very much in favor of the views that I forgot her name again, but the guest in your podcast, actually, what she said, I was very much in agreement with her. Yeah.
And so just listen, Kumar, to the couple of countries that you suggested there, the Soviet Union, which is now disbanded, but also China and North Korea, and think where South Korea is. South Korea is kind of like an anomaly in this part of the world.
Right, you're right.
And it could have been very different. Until 1990, South Korean people couldn't travel abroad freely. They had to get government permission until 1990 to travel abroad. Information and that. South Korea wasn't destined to become a democracy, actually. It had authoritarian rules, everything. Look what happened in Vietnam.
Yeah. Right. South Korean society changed drastically, and it's the speed at which it changed is actually astonishing. A few decades, that's it.
Absolutely. It's this compressed modernity, to use an academic term that I don't like, right? But it experienced all that modernity in a very compressed time. But if you look at the cultural neighbors, the region around it, they haven't done that. So it makes South Korea's example even the more astonishing and admirable and fascinating. It's not going to be easy what they do, but it's made even harder by because if this was Western Europe, if this was between France and Germany and things like that, well, yeah, but this is with North Korea and China and Russia, and Vietnam, all very close, that have all got different degrees of their own system. South Korea, with Japan as an exception, stands alone here. And so that we must take into consideration, because it could have been very different. So the suicide and the fertility rate are big problems, but they're part of a broader historical passage. You did ask me about immigration. I've been working with the Ministry of Justice on an immigration program, which I was very proud to be a part of, because I got to listen to experiences of multicultural life in Korea that were not based on being a white English speaker, which I am. Right. So all experiences are different. So it was very eye-opening and really cool for me to share and to learn and to listen from other people. I think South Korea is getting better. In terms of race and attitude towards other people, it's getting better. If you consider 20 years ago, very difficult, even for a white person, right? But it's getting much better. However, I think sometimes people immediately want it to be like a Gap commercial or a United Nations thing or Canada, just like that now. But it doesn't happen like that. Korea's got its own path and it's got its own thing. So it can use immigration, and attitudes towards certain people in society are not brilliant, absolutely, but they're better than they were. And I think they will also in the future be better than they are now. So it's on the right path. Unfortunately, some people demand changes right now, but they don't consider the historical or cultural context. They just want it to be.
There are nuances. Like it's not always black and white, like an on and off switch. The switch was off, you just turn it on. It doesn't happen like that. And also recently we saw Korea welcoming Afghan refugees. So that is something very interesting, because it's unheard of in South Korean history, I suppose, right? It's a very new thing that happened. So and also I am fortunate to work with an Afghan colleague, because in my lab there is a postdoctoral researcher and he is an Afghan citizen. So from that perspective, I can understand. Because he was also very emotional about the recent tragedies that happened in Afghanistan. So
this, just hearing you talk about your experiences with your Afghan colleague and your own position, the people such as yourself and your colleague are highly educated and do great things in society. And I just wish more of the conversation in South Korea reflected the fact that people from India or Afghanistan are sometimes professors and not just migrant workers and immigrant workers, because we saw that again in Squid Game. And that was one of my problems with the character of Ali, that although it was a very sympathetic and beautiful character, it reinforced the fact that Indian or Pakistani people are manual laborers, naive, deferential to Koreans, physically deformed with the hands. But it didn't show that, no, they're sometimes professors teaching your kids.
Right.
That's the reality, isn't it, Kumar? So I think there needs to be more media representation of people from different parts of the world, such as yourself and your colleagues, doing what you do, teaching the young South Koreans. But that needs to be reflected in the media and the narrative more, and rather than...
Right. I think that is happening slowly, because the younger generation is more aware of what is going on globally. And I suppose that with time, like you said, that Korea is on its own pace. So it will happen with time, I hope. And right. And those kind of things, like what you said, the prejudices which are in the society. And sometimes I've experienced that personally, but not too much, actually, to be honest. Not as much as I had thought before coming to Korea, that I might experience more of prejudicial things against me or towards me in society in general. But in my personal opinion, I did not experience that too much. Sometimes I did, but that is the individual's ignorance in behaving in that way. So yeah, in general, I found Korean society to be very accommodating and very helpful, and they actually smile at you, and many people are actually voluntarily want to help you, assist you when you are in the public. And if, for example, someone is not speaking Korean, they are ready to help them and assist them. So there are many positive stories like that, and which needs to be highlighted. And I think that Korean society evolves with time, and their attitude towards immigrants also changes with time. So yeah,
I hope, Kumar, that's a a beautiful message, and I hope more of those messages get out, because that's not the story that gets in the media.
Yeah.
Because that story, and by the way, that's based on my own experiences as well. I think Korean people, I love Korean people. I think they're friendly, they're warm, they're humorous.
Very friendly, actually, yeah.
Of course, you have problems, just like you'd have it anywhere.
Everywhere,
but in general, on the whole, the reason I love this country is the people, right? It's not the systemic things, it's the actual people. But when we look at the media and we look at the reports come out, it's always bad and it's always negative. And I've spoken to certain journalists and things about this, and they've told me that if they put something out that's critical of society, they get far more hits, far more likes and retweets than a positive story.
Sensational, right? It's more, it will get you more clicks. But
when we think about that, then people might be looking at Korea, thinking about coming to Korea, not having your experience with Korea, and they see that, and then they perceive that as to be the reality. And then they come here expecting the huge conflict and the huge problems, and then those huge problems and conflicts might actually manifest because of the articles. So we need to think about what social responsibility there is in only giving the negative stories and never giving the good. It's not to say that the negative things don't happen, because they do happen.
They do happen.
But there's also a lot of good, and the good never gets told. So I'm really glad that you would tell that story and you would allow that goodness to come out.
Sure. And we have been talking for an hour now, so I would go towards the closing.
Shut up, David.
I'm actually quite enjoying it. If you're open to it, I may extend it to maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. But actually, we have to keep the time in mind. So anyway, so what is your take on Hallyu, the Korean wave right now? Because I think it's one of the subjects that you focus on in your teaching as well, right? And so what I see is, for example, you are in the humanities and social sciences and all that stuff, and people who are more culturally or anthropologically interested in Korea, they are more like into the Korean wave and stuff like that. But what I'm seeing right now is lots and lots of new students in STEM fields who are coming to Korea, that their number has increased first and foremost, because also I think that Korea is actually ranked number 2 on the countries that spend the amount of money on science and development research per GDP. Like, it's number 2. The first is Israel, I think. Korea spends more than 4% of its GDP on scientific research. So actually the funding is great. And we actually, in my personal experience also, we never have to worry about buying instruments and equipments and stuff like that, which actually I heard from my colleagues back in USA and also in UK and also in Australia, that they have to worry a lot about getting the funds to buy new equipments, because science equipments can be very expensive sometimes. Well, most of the times, I think. But anyway, so in this manner, Korea is very helpful in doing research, scientific research. And so many of the students who are coming in STEM fields, so they are actually influenced by K-pop and K-drama and the Hallyu in general, the Korean culture. And then they decide to come to Korea, and then they come to get to know about advantages of doing scientific research in Korea. So I'm seeing that influence in even coming into the STEM field. So that is something very interesting that is going on, because I don't think that happens in other countries, like people getting excited by the culture, then coming to do scientific research. Right.
But I think what you say, it's fascinating to hear that, and it proves, Kumar, that the effect of Hallyu is real.
Yeah.
So there is this idea sometimes you'll read from cynical people that it's government-sponsored promotion and things like that.
Right.
There was some elements of that back in the
There
late
may be
90s.
truth in that, but it's not the overall picture.
The government didn't make Size Gangnam Style. The government didn't make Squid Game and Parasite, right? These are independent successes that the government was not able to predict or create or promote. So I think the most important thing is that more and more people are becoming aware of Korea through Hallyu. And Korean people love that. So if you ask a Korean person in their 30s and 40s, like, do you like Squid Game? Do you like BTS? Do you like aespa? They'll say, no. But I'm super happy that. But that's a very interesting thing, because if Dua Lipa or Ed Sheeran, all right, if they start, or Coldplay, they start crushing it in the charts, I'm British, shouldn't I feel proud? I don't. But in Korea, there's this sense of achievement, and so I think that the Hallyu success is real, and it's come when Korea has opened up. It's given freedom to some of its artists to create these products. It also shows, I think, that the wider world is becoming more diverse in its taste. So it also points to the Western world, at least for one example, to becoming more open to these ideas. The English dictionary puts Korean words in its dictionary now.
I think it was 15 words or 25.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Oscars, they give an award to Parasite. They don't have to do that, by the way. These foreign countries, they don't have to acknowledge Korean success, but they are. So it's two things. I think it's the outside world also changing and diversifying and opening up, as well as Korea producing these contents. And so I find that really fascinating. One thing that I would say, if there are people that are looking to come into Korea and into STEM to work with you and buy all these expensive equipment that my tax pays for, that sometimes in Korea, for example, K-pop is niche. Right. So if you look at the Melon charts, it's all IU and Park Hyo-shin and things like this. Most Korean people aren't listening to Blackpink, or Stray Kids or things like that. A lot of the music, the fans are international fans. They're Indian fans and they're Chinese and Hong Kong rather than Korean. So that all the Korean people are listening to Selena Gomez and Charlie Puth. So there's this fascinating crossover that happens.
Actually, I think I mentioned in my conversation with you earlier, actually, I worked with Professor Joseph E. at Hanyang University Political Science Department, and he actually has a course on English writing, which is more inclined towards like academic writing. But in his course, he actually wants the students to pursue all kinds of writing. So in that class, there are several international students as well as local Korean students. So what I found was, several of the international students, they were highly influenced by BTS and K-pop, like students coming from, for example, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other Asian countries, Thailand. So they were very much influenced with BTS. They even had like water bottles with BTS logos and cute pictures on them. And the Korean students who were in the class, they were least interested about all those stuff. And they were listening to, for example, Linkin Park or other American bands and European bands and others, U2, for example. So yeah, what you said is also what I have experienced. And I think also the K-pop industry is trying to, I listened to your podcast this morning, as I said, like the 4th episode about K-pop and all that. So the agencies are also trying to capture that attention from the international audience, and that is why I even read one article recently in the Korea Times, like they are opening up to hiring more international people, or at least bilingual people who are good in English and Korean, because majority of their customers or fans, they are they are customers. So anyway, so they are international. So
but that's the way it's changing. So just one last point. By the way, a minute ago you said Taiwan is a country. Well done, Kumar. I said that in one of my articles as well. Wow, come on. I will say this though, that Squid Game and Parasite and My Name and dramas and movies and webtoons, they're very much Korean. right? Whether you like them or not, they're in the Korean language. They're talking about Korean stuff. Like Parasite's really Korean.
It's very Korean.
Squid Game is pretty Korean. And they get international success. But the one difference I would say is if you look at something like BTS, their big three hits this year, Dynamite, Butter, Permission to Dance.
Right.
They're all in English. They're talking about King Kong and Cups of Milk and things like this. And they're all written by Western pop stars as well, Dave Stewart and Ed Sheeran. So there is this, excuse me, element that we don't want the K-pop to lose its Koreanness by chasing that international success, by chasing those fans. Because actually, I think that, you know, in the K-pop thing, they talk about fans before and after a certain mark, right? And they want that Koreanness, but sometimes the companies might focus on that international success, and they might lose what makes it real and authentic and original.
Right. Well, so yeah. So, do you want to talk about anything specific, or otherwise we'll go towards closing the session?
I'd like to ask you, Kumar.
Right.
What do you think of, where do you see Korea at the moment? Where do you see South? I mean, you live and you work here, you do your research. Where do you see South Korea culturally, socially now and looking forward? What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's in a state of reflux. It's changing quite rapidly. For example, if we see some specific countries for UK, for example, one professor who used to work in my lab for over 5 years, I think 6 years. So his name was Professor Jan Shuleko. He's from Swansea, UK, and he's back home in the UK. So he also talks lots about cultural stuff and all that. So what I see is several countries have their own persona, which is cemented in place. Like it's not changing, or at least we are not seeing it changing rapidly. For example, the older established countries like the UK and even USA, it has its own taste, a flavor to it. And the flavor of Korea seems to be changing quite rapidly. You know, when I think about Korea, I do not have a specific image in my mind. If I think about some other countries, like what I talked about, so for them, I have a kind of specific image, although things are changing everywhere. But in Korea, it seems to be in reflux, changing quite rapidly, and it seems to be like a rising star. And there seems to be lots of opportunities here if people want to endeavor in that, which may not be present elsewhere. So I see Korea as being an excellent hotspot of activity right now in all aspects, in culturally, language-wise, science, and everything. So yeah, I quite enjoy living in Korea, and I think it's in a state of reflux, and people should be enjoying this Hallyu and help in the growth of Korea and by extension the world. Yeah.
It's on an upward trajectory, isn't it?
Yeah. It's growing very
Some
rapidly.
Other countries seem to be on a downward trajectory. In terms of, well, no, it's just genuine. Not all countries go the same way. But
yeah.
Going down, like with infrastructure and politics and division. South Korea seems to be on an upward trajectory. Where it will go, what will happen, we don't know, but it's going that way, right?
Right.
I agree. Can I ask you one more question while we're here? Sure. You might not put this in the podcast or anything, but I'm curious about it. Can you tell me about the Indian caste system in 2021?
I must say that it's very much still alive, to my dismay. It's terrible. And I think it's also, for example, you must be knowing the background of caste system. Like you said earlier, that what people used to do that defined their identity. So that's exactly what caste system is, like what people used to do. For example, people used to be priests. So that family lineage was of priests. Some families are farmers. So the children are going to be farmers. So they are one caste, they are another caste, and like that. So it also propagated when we were a colony of UK. So at that time, the generals and the authorities, so they had to exploit the differences between the society to actually rule. And that's one of the major rules of how to control a colony. So they propagated that also, but of course we cannot put all the blame on UK or because it was the individual Indians who were actually being prejudiced against each other, even though your skin is the same, your color is the blood color is the same, but just for a caste system, people were actually against each other. So that happened. In modern times, what happened is, like you said, people came out of their shells, people came out of their family lineage, and people are doing what they want now. No longer, it's not like you're from a farmer's family, so you're going to be a farmer. You are from a priest family, you're going to be priest. Now everyone is doing their own thing. So in the modern context, I don't think caste system is applicable anymore, because in the modern world, everyone can do what they like. But caste system is systemically promoted. For example, there is affirmative action in place back in India, where people from certain background, the castes which were historically backwards, like they have less wealth. For example, they were from the lower caste, so they used to do menial tasks, so they do not have the family wealth. Now, whatever the younger generation is earning, it's a different thing, but so they are considered backward castes. So for them, the government reserves seats in universities and in other jobs. So it's just like what is happening in South Africa, for example, affirmative action basically. But the government also says that when the constitution was made, when India gained independence in 1950s, that caste system is abolished. So in the constitution, it says that it's no longer, we should not do all this stuff because this is not good. But at the same time, the government also has this affirmative action in place to boost people from the backward class. So it's very, I think, hypocritical in some sense. But well, that's how it is. And at the ground level right now, nobody talks about caste directly or openly to each other in public. Like if you go to India and when the families talk with each other, they do not talk about like from which caste you are directly. But when it comes to marriages or when it's come to family alliances or when or certain people with certain proclivity of thinking, so they may ask you like from which background you are, from which caste you are. And to my utter dismay, even in present times when lots of marriages are arranged in India, so they generally like to marry in their own caste. So that is something very shocking. Like I did not know about that this is going on right now, but it appears to be very much prevalent in Indian society. So that is something which I think it's not good.
Thank you for the information. I know it might be a sensitive topic, but I just wanted to hear and learn from you. Many of my Korean students, when they go abroad, they like the idea of going abroad because they're all those social restrictions and things from Korea get removed when they go abroad. So when you're in South Korea as an Indian and there are other Indians here and you're researching and working together, does the caste system amongst Indians in South Korea disappear or does it still exist?
It appears to disappear. Well, that is what I have observed. Like, because I think there is a sense of community when Indians are abroad, or because the Indians are in minority, of course, in the society. So they actually band together to help each other grow and help the community grow. And the caste lines appear to be blurred or disappear. Like, for example, I've never heard anyone asking me like from which caste I am, because if somebody asks me, I will just say that, oh, I'm an Indian citizen, because I do not care what caste. Like you said, the concept of color blindness, so same caste blindness. So I would say that, but here I think the Indians living abroad do not care much about caste, whether it's because of their education or their change in thinking, or it's because of the circumstances that they have to band together to help the community prosper. I don't know why is that, but here there doesn't seem to be those kind of boundaries, caste boundaries, like what is back home in India.
So that's a good thing. So that's another reason for people to come here. K-pop and no caste.
Yeah, but I must say that in general life in India, the caste does not play that big a role now. but only in specific instances people still harbor that caste system in their mind. And of course the modern people are getting progressive, so several of the modern people do not care much. But so I hope what my hope is, as the younger generation keeps on moving ahead, so they slowly get rid of all this caste system and all, because there's no point to it, in my opinion. So
yeah, there's just always a cultural lag, like we were saying earlier. We expect things to change straight away, and economies and political systems can change overnight, but culture takes a bit longer to move, doesn't it?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for the information, though. I love that. That was great to hear.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And how the time flew, I did not know, because we talked for a long time, and it was very interesting and very eye-opening talking with you. So
thank you very much. No, I really appreciate the chance to speak with you and to listen to your ideas as well. It felt like a great exchange.
Right.
If anyone makes it through this far listening, please check out my podcast as well, Korea Deconstructed.
So I would like to end this podcast now, and also I recommend all the listeners to tune into your podcast, the Korea Deconstructed. So far there have been 4 episodes, and I look forward. Is it going to be released weekly or bi-weekly?
I've already recorded my next one. It's on socialism, communism in South Korea.
Oh wow, my favorite subject. Okay, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you very much, Dr. David, for the time, and hopefully we stay in touch, and maybe we can get you on the podcast down the line sometime later. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Kumar. I loved it.
Yes. Take care. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Tune in to the ISRK YouTube channel for more videos. I'll see you soon. Thank you.